Okay, we're now live, Chair.
Good evening to everyone who's able to attend tonight. This is the April version of the SD61 Operations Policy and Planning Committee. My name is Rob Painter. I am the chair of the committee. Also on the committee, the other trustees are Nicole Duncan, Derek Gagnon, Karen Kwan, and Natalie Bayo. And I would like to start commence the meeting with an acknowledgement of the traditional territories. And one thing I do want to offer up, it's been observed by other people smarter than me, more considerate than me, that in some respects, territorial acknowledgements have been ringing a little empty for some folks, that we've gotten very good at incorporating them into our meeting agendas. And, you know, I hear it at work every day that I'm in a meeting. We start off this way. And yet the point has been made that it's not enough to simply state the words, that we have to actually live it and really think about what it means to be on another nation's territory, and to think about what we can do in terms of reconciliation and equity. So I'll leave that with my thought for the day. The Greater Victoria School District wishes to recognize and acknowledge the Esquimalt and Songhees nations, on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. We'll start off with the approval of the agenda. Would one of the trustees, Trustee Duncan, I take it, will propose the recommended motion that the April 17th, 2023 agenda be approved. All those in favor? Sorry, I should have asked if there were amendments, but since everyone's in favor, I'm thinking there weren't. I'll get that right next time. Moving on to approval of the minutes. The recommended motion is that the March 6th, 2023 combined educational policy and directions and operations policy and planning committee meeting minutes be approved. And in this case, we're only looking at the ops component of those minutes. Are there any recommended amendments? Okay, seeing none. Anyone prepared to move the motion? Moved by Trustee Gagnon. All those in favor? And that is unanimous as well. Thank you very much. Any business arising from the minutes? Okay, seeing none. And we don't have any presentations today. Moving on to Superintendent's report. And Superintendent, anything to report?
Oh, thank you, Chair Painter. Nothing, no superintendent's report this evening.
Okay, just confirming. Thank you. Okay. And moving on to personnel items, and we have a staffing report from the Director of Human Resources Services, Ver.
Thank you, Chair Painter. At the March meeting of the committee, or the joint committee, trustees received a report on educational assistant staffing. During the course of that discussion, it was requested that we provide an update to trustees on a regular basis on the number of failed to fill educational assistant positions that we had within the district. This report provides the committee with an update on month by month since September of 22 for the current school year of the failed to fill positions. And as you'll see from the report, it confirms what we have all known and discussed, that there have been significant positions, but that is not a surprise. That's exactly what we talked about back on March the 6th. What I'm proposing in the report is that we provide this with two trustees every 2 months. So on October, December, February, and April, and June of each year. And each year we'll start the year afresh, and we'll give you an update as we go through the year. So you'll have that trend throughout the entire year, and the same format as you see it there. And you'll see that the balance of April and May and June, of course, as pages are blank, we'll fill those in when we get to the June report, and then we'll start that process all anew in the new school year each year. The table also, although trustees didn't request it, but we've got that information, provides a column on teacher failed to fills, just for the information of trustees. Those numbers are not nearly as significant in comparison with the EA failed to fill numbers, but since we had those, we decided that we should provide those to you on a regular basis. So the chart includes that information as well. Those numbers will likely increase in May and June, because that's where we see remedy time, and that's where we tend to see the significant fail to fills within the teacher ranks. But we'll give you that information every 2 months, along with the EA information. We've talked a lot in March about what we were doing to move forward to try and remedy those situations, so I won't bother repeating that at this point in time, but would simply refer you back to the March 6th report that deals with some of our initiatives. We're starting to see a slight impact. I say that with cautious optimism, that when I look at the April numbers as opposed to the previous numbers, although those numbers are still high, they're a little less than they were in the previous months, but we still have a lot of room to improve, and those initiatives we discussed back in March will move us in that right direction. Happy to answer questions on the report of the numbers.
Trustee Duncan, or actually, just do we have any questions from stakeholder representatives? I'm not seeing any hands.
I think
And Tracy,
might have a question or a comment.
Yeah, Tracy, I just wanted to check in with you. I don't have an image, so I don't know if you've got your hand up, but
I'm sorry, I ended up having to join while I'm on my phone, and I want to make sure that you're hearing me.
no,
Is that
very clearly.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, no, I just joined at the last minute, so while I probably would have comments, I actually missed it. So I'll leave that for now, but I'm sure I can ask later once I've caught myself up.
Definitely.
Thank you for checking, though.
Yeah. Okay, Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chair. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you to Dr. Bear and to the human resource staff for pulling the report together. I appreciate the additional information and context around our teacher failure to fills. It's obviously in stark contrast to what we're seeing with EA failure to fill. And my hope was that if, and I think the suggestion that we do this every couple of months is a good one. I think the intention, certainly from my perspective, is to ensure that the board is both apprised of what we're doing on this front, but also can see trends over the long term. So over an annual period, and certainly every couple of months, allows the board to keep ourselves focused on this. Because we all know that it has a significant impact on students. What I would say is, as I look at the reports and the numbers, it's great to not just have the anecdotal information, but to actually have factual data from HR. That's much appreciated. It really gives a clearer sense of the magnitude of the challenges that we're facing. I have no doubt that everyone is doing their utmost in order to address, from a policy and practice perspective, anything we can do to encourage both the spare board in September, which I know is a good size, but to encourage EAs to stay with us and to be there when we need them throughout the year. I know that one of the initiatives, Director Bear, that you spoke of in March was changing some of the policy and practice around who is eligible to be on the spare board in the first place. And I wonder if you can give us a bit of feedback on how well that change is working. I know you no longer require EAs to commit full-time availability in order to be placed on the spare board. So I'm wondering, how you're finding that.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan. We're starting to, I think the slight adjustment you're seeing in the April numbers is reflective of a number of those changes that we sort of made in that late February, early March time period before March break. So some of those initiatives that you talked about. The other thing that actually is working well from my perspective is the change we instituted to when we do interviews. So previously, as trustees may recall, we were only doing interviews every couple of months. So we build out a certain number and then we do interviews. We've now been interviewing almost as quickly as they come in. And I think that's a reflection of one of the main reflections of the numbers and changes in the numbers is the fact we're interviewing and we continue to be interviewing as they come in within reason, within a few days of when a resume comes in. So we're putting them on faster. At the same time, individuals go off on leave, then the individuals are off on sick leave and other types of leaves. So we still see a high number of those. So we're doing a bit of treading of the water as I would describe it, unfortunately, but you're seeing a slight adjustment in those April numbers. I'm heartened that they're dropping sort of in that 40 to 45 range, whereas previous they were sort of in the 60, 70 range. So we're starting to see some changes. I think, quite honestly, though, until we do the more significant changes, such as looking at whether we hire some permanent spare board employees, looking at whether we bring in temporary classroom support type personnel, in other words, not fully qualified EAs, we're going to need to do those significant changes before we see a substantive change in those numbers. And unfortunately, the changes we made have helped, but they're just tinkering with it, and we need more significant changes. And we're going to continue to look at those for the fall.
And thank you, Director Bear. Jane?
Hi there, thanks. I just wanted to say, and I appreciate that HR is doing what they can, but I'm going to say, and what I hear from our members in the schools, I am concerned about the stretch of qualifications that we're seeing. Like we really are really stretching the scope of what a qualified EA is. And if we move to, the responsible adult, we're going to probably lose some qualified EAs, and we're just not going to be able to provide the same supports for the students. So I just want, to make that point, because I think that's something for us to be really careful of.
Definitely that. Thank you, Jane. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just had a follow-up. For Director Bears, we received some feedback after our March meeting, and I wondered if you had a view. So some of what we're hearing from EAs is that they might have a preference about what school they work at, and the feedback we're getting is that they don't have that same kind of autonomy to state a preference about where they work. And the suggestion was made that because they can't state a preference, that it's one of the challenges in terms of retention of EAs. So I'm wondering if you could speak to kind of what our policy is around EAs expressing an interest in working at a particular school, and just sort of how that works.
Yeah, we don't provide for that preference, quite honestly, it's because with teachers we have, as the data shows, limited failed to fills, leaving aside what might come up in May and June. So we have very limited need to move them around. Quite honestly, from the perspective of a staffing we really need the ability to move EAs around from school to school, because what we don't want to see is, as trustees are aware of, a situation whereby individuals have preference only for certain schools and they don't have preference for other schools, and that creates an inequity within the system. So we haven't asked them for that information because we don't want to create a bit of a myth that their preference will allow them to go to a certain school, because we continue where necessary to redeploy them, especially if we see situations where certain schools are consistently having higher than average fails to fills. We and the staff that run that automated dispatch system will redeploy to try and balance that out a bit, and it does give a bit of a misimpression when we ask for preferences that those will be taken into account in terms of the assignment. We don't have that luxury. We may, if we ever got to a point where we had sufficient numbers, that we could provide some coverage to get to that point, but we certainly aren't at that point now. So we shied away, quite frankly, for asking for preferences when we know we can't honor those preferences on many occasions. Certainly, EAs can choose to accept or not accept jobs based on their own individual preferences, and they will get calls out for a significant number of jobs at any given time. So they may, by themselves, doing a bit of self-selection, but we certainly haven't been wanting to perpetuate that belief that because you pick a certain school, you're necessarily going to end up at that school, whereas that's not the case with teachers, given the limited fail to fills. If someone picks a certain school and indicates that preference, then they're likely to end up at that school, and we're not having to redeploy them based on our current fail to fills and our teachers. So there is a bit of a difference between, unfortunately, between our two groups.
Thanks so much for clarifying. That helps a lot.
Moving on to Tracy.
Thank you so much. And I'm sorry for my continued struggles with getting my video going. I just wanted to briefly support what Jane was saying from QP, that responsible adults are never the direction that we want to go, because, and I think I did share this before, but it can create more issues than actually resolving them in a lot of cases. And it does, I feel, create a lot more work for the other education assistants in the school. And so I just really want to, flag that as a concern, of VCPAC as well. And I am really appreciative of the efforts to try and resolve this failure to fill. And the numbers are really, I'm so happy to see them, and they are quite shocking. Despite the fact that I shouldn't be shocked by that. But I just wanted to, I'm glad that we're trying to do something about it, but I really think that we need to be listening more to the EAs themselves and, the resolutions they propose, even in the district budget, the public meeting. There was feedback from EAs that said that even 30 hours a week isn't really enough. It's not a full-time job, and it's not enough to support a family. So those are the kinds of measures that I really think, we need to be leaning into a lot more in terms of retention. And we really do need to stay focused on making sure that qualified people are working with their kids. So, thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Any other comments, questions? Okay, I'll jump in with a couple of my own. An observation, and this is with respect to EAs being able to state a preference. And I can understand that it's a significant issue. It's to try to provide some equity and coverage, et cetera. But as it was pointed out by one individual, is that the nature of the position and the pay and hours are such that this is not necessarily a job that is automatically going to appeal to those, expecting a moderate income. This is really kind of a marginal employment position. And that's not to denigrate it, it's critically important. But that a good number of these people may have limited access to a vehicle. In a lot of cases, we're talking about moms who also have daycare responsibilities, which limit their flexibility. And when some of these issues are taken into consideration, I believe that we might actually be able to increase our relative number of available EAs by identifying EAs who are only able to work in certain schools and free up others who might have greater ability to be mobile to be able to work across the district. And I realize it would require a more complex structure for recording availabilities, but I don't think that's insurmountable. We could probably get a couple of computer science students at one of our high schools to work on the structure. Could be a good way forward for them with Pro-D.
So
The other
Trustee Painter, if I can just comment on that
certainly.
we can certainly reconfigure the system to allow for that. But if that is the case, and that's the trustee's preference, then the trustees shouldn't be able to express concerns about the equity or the inequity that will result in the system. Because what we won't do then is override their preferences to assign them to schools that are chronically underfilled. So that's the trade-off to allowing for that. It's not a technical challenge. We can do that as we do with teachers. However, we've also then got to prepare to honor their requests. So when we get a school that has systemic failed to fills amongst their EAs, it won't be up to us then to go and try and override that to spread that pain out. So that's the challenge isn't in the technical aspect of it. The challenge is in the equity aspect of it. When you have significant fail to fills and individuals can pick and choose and override. And I certainly wouldn't want my staff, with EAs having given a preference, to phone them to try and tell them that we're overriding it, or to tell them that, or try and convince them to go elsewhere. So it's not the technology that's a problem. It's a question of the equity. And if we aren't concerned about equity, and we aren't concerned about schools that have more challenges within our system, and therefore may not be as much of a preference, or classes that have more challenges within our system, it may not be a preference, then we can certainly let EAs state that preference and shop around. But it's a question of trying to balance that out. And right now we're trying to deal with it more on the side of equity, but we can certainly leave it more on the choice of the individual. So
no, and it's a fair point, but it also occurs to me that this is primarily talking about spare board. If we have issues of schools that are chronically understaffed, then perhaps what we should be doing is looking at hiring additional permanent positions in those schools, recognizing that they're likely to need that support on an ongoing basis. The one other observation I was going to offer is that as I have been told, one of the biggest factors in an effective relationship between EA and student is the relationship itself. The ability for the student to have someone who they know and trust working with them can be a make or break issue in a lot of cases. And while I recognize that we don't have a lot of options when it comes to trying to fill vacancies, that having a system that would in any way, shape, or form start to improve upon the frequency with which students are supported by certain EAs, and obviously that necessity is gonna vary, but certain students are really gonna benefit from having the same EAs on an ongoing basis. And if that means that we have a pool within a family of schools or within a neighborhood or two, then I think that's something that's worth considering. With respect to equity and inequity, not making a suggestion, but it's something that would be really, for me, insightful and perhaps a topic for an in-camera discussion if we're concerned about how this might be perceived. But I'd be interested to know which schools are tougher to fill. My last thought, and then I'll get off this, is question about the teacher failure to fills. Is this does this account for every position that has gone unfilled, or is this only where TTOCs are not available to respond to that? And just for clarification, anecdotally, I've heard that it's not uncommon for learning support teachers, librarians, and other non-enrolling positions to be tasked with taking on a classroom in a failure to fill situation, basically to provide some oversight in a classroom environment. And even if that position is filled, I would still see having to reallocate staff within a school as a failure to fill scenario if that learning support position or librarian position isn't being backfilled. So with that in mind, I was just wondering if you could clarify what it means.
Yeah, so these numbers include every failure to fill. Often what you will see when you look at a number on any given day where there's a teacher failed to fill, I would anticipate that in most or all of those circumstances, one of the things they would have done was redeploy their staff. So we still consider that to be a failure to fill because we couldn't bring it in a TTOC to fill that original vacancy. They would then, in order to staff that classroom, redeploy it, but we still consider that to be a failure to fill. So this accounts for all of the teacher fails to fill. They would, if they redeploy them, that failure to fill may shift within the school, but it's still listed on this chart.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And I thought I saw someone's hand, but I'm not seeing it now. Cindy.
Just going back to the EA conversation. Sorry, I was a little bit late putting my hand up. I agree with what Jane was saying, and I'd like to support her comments. It also, and I know that the situation is really quite complicated. The EAs we have some really fantastic EAs out there. And I know that, like you were saying, Rob, that that relationship is really quite important. And if students connect with certain EAs, and sometimes when those EAs are removed from that work environment into a different one, it creates some unsafe situations. Maybe that's how I will put it. Have we looked at, like you were saying before and touching on it, Rob, have we looked at these unfilled vacancies for EAs? Are they in the same schools? And if they are we looking at why? And are we looking at trying to improve the work environment as to why these EAs are not filling those, like going into those jobs? Do you know what I'm trying to say? And looking at the whole situation at that school as a whole and just trying to make it better.
So certainly we can look at that. However, I've got to advise the board that with a HR department that is staffed the level it is, that is primarily reactive instead of proactive, there's a limit to what we can do. So our primary focus right now is trying to come up with ways to fill EA positions as a whole, recognizing that we have a problem throughout the system. When we get that better under control, then I think we'll have an ability and have the time to start looking at our EA vacancies and which schools they're in. But right now, we're just trying to deal with the broader chronic problem, which is significant fails to fill that average about 1.5 or 2 per school every single day up until the March break. So we're focused on that. Will become more sophisticated when we solve that broader problem.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just had one more comment I wanted to make just off the back of Director Bear's advice really to the board. First of all, thank you, Director Bear. That it's really important for the board to understand the resource challenges that impact your department's ability to analyze or to assess some other potential strategies. I think that the board not only needs to be aware of that, but needs to consider that when we look at our amended budget. So I would certainly think that the board would be very interested to hear your views and your advice about what would be required from an HR resource perspective in order to allow the experts to engage in the necessary analysis to kind of look at that school-based level and come up with some strategies to move the dial. So yeah, thank you for the advice, and I for one would love to hear more from you about what you'd advise us to do from a resource allocation perspective.
Thank you.
Did you have any remarks?
Nothing right now,
Okay,
Chair Peter. I'll give that some thought and happy to provide some feedback to the board.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. Director Vera, thank you very much. It is so helpful to have some actual numbers in front of us to take the level of conversation from, conceptual to factual, if you will. And despite, always having a question about what else can we do, and recognizing that you and your department are working very hard to address this issue. It's not a new one. It's not going away anytime soon, but we definitely appreciate everything that your staff is doing to address the shortfall.
Thank you.
Okay, Finance and Legal Affairs. Moving on to the monthly financial report. And will that be the Secretary Treasurer or the Associate Secretary Treasurer? Secretary Treasurer, over to you.
All right, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so in the agenda package, you will find the monthly financial report for March 2023. It's on page 13. The prior year numbers are from March 2022, a report that was provided in the April 2022 Ops agenda package. And the current year is reflecting the March 2023 month end. So it was run after month end. The budget we're looking at in this report is the final budget plus any adjustments that have occurred after that. And the actuals are July 1st through to March 31st. So looking at the revenue section, the revenue budget that we're still expecting to receive is 27% in the current year, which is exactly the same as where we were at this time last year. Expenses, the expense budget available to spend is reflected at 30% in the current year, and it was 32% in the prior year. One thing we will notice in the months going to the end of this year is that with a spending freeze in place, we will probably see the current year percentage, or we hope we will see the current year percentage lower than what it was last year. So the information is there for your review. I don't know if you have any questions, but do my best to answer them.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you to the Secretary Treasurer for the report. I just wanted to circle back. That was one question I did have on this report, was just wanting to know whether we have any kind of initial assessment of where we are as a result of the spending freeze. Do we have any intel, any idea of how much? No. Okay. I see Julie shaking her head. No. Okay. Obviously look forward to that whenever you do know. So yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Oh, Trustee Duncan.
Sorry,
For a
I
change.
forgot. I actually have one more question. Sorry, so this was just in relation to the recoveries. I thought that this would be a good opportunity to just get a sense of what benefits there are that we glean from the annual contribution to the digital services recovery. Since we have our Director of IT here, I wonder whether we could just get a sense of what benefits come with that digital services recovery amount. And sorry, this is on page 15 of the pack up, and I believe, let me just make this big enough I can read it. It's line 439 of the budget.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan. Through the chair, that may be something Secretary Treasurer Stride may be able to answer. The digital services is the My Education BC funding payments rather per school district, and the network, and I believe it's a provincially calculated cost recovery that gets assessed as the expenses become clarified throughout the year. So maybe the Secretary Treasurer can help me out here.
That's exactly right. It's provincially provided, and what they do is they basically take the cost off of the revenue that they provide to us. One thing I will note, which will come up in the next report, is that the cost that we are charged, especially for the next generation network, is based on actual costs. And so they will do a review of costs and provide refunds. So they do an initial allocation or initial recovery amount, and then adjust for that once they know what actual costs are.
Thank you both.
And what we don't see is any real change to our service. So it's kind of separate to the actual service in terms of internet bandwidth to the schools and number of licenses for My Education BC.
That's super helpful. Yeah, thanks for that context. I suspected as much, but I thought this is an opportunity to clarify that. So thank you.
And Secretary Treasurer, if I could just ask, on page 14, there's a couple numbers floating in sort of in between columns or without a column header. And I'm just wondering if, is that just a formatting thing, or is that referring to something else?
Is it the column that's right after the percentages?
Sorry, flipping between screens. No, it's between year to date and total expenditure.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It actually, I'm not sure why it's not on this one, but it should say encumbrances. So those are the
Oh, okay.
encumbrances or purchase order commitments that are out there. So they've committed funds against those budgets, but they haven't actually, the expenses haven't occurred yet. So what happens is they'll sit in that column as a commitment. And then as the purchase order is, the items are received and then we pay against the purchase order, those costs will shift into the, where it says March 2023 and year to date. So that's just an oversight. I didn't realize that heading was missing on this one. We'll make sure it's there for next time.
Just looking at the math, I was thinking that now, of course, I'm doing it from memory now, March 2023 and the encumbrances, do those add up to the expenditure, or is the encumbrance over and above what the expenditure is? It just seemed for one or two that looked like the math worked really nicely. So
Yeah, so it'll be the year to date column plus the encumbrances that will be the total expenses. So it's over and above the expenses. Yes.
thank you. Okay, last call. Seeing none, let's move on to the budget change report for March.
Thank you, Chair. So the budget change report starts on page 16 of your agenda package. This is the March 2023 report. If you go to the section called Changes Amended Budget, there are 5 new items that have been added for March 2023. The first one is labor settlement funds, BCTF benefits and experience recognition for $93,000. This is specifically related to some changes in the maternity and pregnancy leave supplemental employment benefits. So it's basically the maternity, pregnancy, the top up that teachers would get when they go on those leaves. The next item is digital services recovery, which we touched on in the last item. So there was an adjustment of $50,000, so a reduction in those costs to the district. And as Andy mentioned, this is the Next Generation Network and MyEdBC, the student information system. So at the end of March, the ministry determined that there would be an underspend for the 22-23 school year and returned funds to all of the districts. The third item is support staff benefits adjustment to actual. So when Julie created the budget, she used the prior year amount as an estimate, and then the actual came in at $6,000 higher. So that's a revenue. And then miscellaneous donations and revenues to March 31st, there was an additional $17,000. $4,000 of that was for First Nations grad recognition. And then there were a variety of small donations and miscellaneous revenue, about $13,000, the largest being $3,000 for a school funded project for an out-of-school care provider. And the last one is Cooper Smith Music Library donations, $145 received in March for that. So that's it for operating. I don't know if you want to stop, if anyone has any questions about those ones before I move on to special purpose and capital.
I have one question, Secretary Treasurer. It's just about the enrollment adjustment, and I'm just wondering if the placement in order, it's up near the top of the list, suggests to me that it was a change that occurred earlier in the year, and I was just wondering with the amended budget and whether that had changed at all, whether our situation had changed there at all.
Yeah, so these are in order. So if you go back to the previous months, you'll see this exact list. So I'm not even sure what month that's from, but that is the risk. Remember the risk item that the board took in assuming that our enrollment would be higher than what we had submitted to the ministry in February. And so we couldn't put that amount into the ministry grant because we're not allowed to put anything in that line unless it's been announced by the ministry. And so Julie had put that number in there. So it's just recognizing that number. But you're absolutely right. When the final budget was done, that line that has the 6.6 million in it would have been adjusted for the extra enrollment that we did receive.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, jumping between screens. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to go back to that same line item that the Secretary Treasurer referenced, that amended annual budget changes to February. I just wanted to clarify that the unanticipated TTOC costs that we saw would be included in that, not in that line item or in that. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
And just around that, are we anticipating those same increased costs in the coming school year?
I believe what was reflected in the final budget for the 22-23 year was around 1.2 million, and the 23-24 budget is including half of that. So this, I believe it's 620,000. Julie can correct me if I'm wrong on that number. So we were not anticipating having that huge lag that we had this year, but also being conservative in just going kind of halfway. And we'll obviously have to make an adjustment to that in final budget if that's not what actually happens. And Julie has a comment, I believe.
Please go ahead, Julie.
Thanks, through the chair. So, sorry, were you referring to the TTOC costs or the EA replacement hiring legs?
At TTOC, so I know I think we ended up at around 2.6 million in TTOC costs, and that we didn't anticipate it being that high. And so I'm just wondering where we are in terms of our assessment of what we think will happen next year.
So I was a little optimistic in the TTOC budget for next year. So didn't build in the full 2.6, had a real hard look at some of the areas that, you know, looked at what were anomalies, like for example, in maternity leaves, bereavement leaves, long-term sick leaves, that kind of thing, and made some tweaks. I'm hopeful that the TTOC costs aren't as high as they were, but did definitely build in some sort of a buffer in case we do come in, but not as aggressive as they are looking right now.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Appreciate it.
Superintendent, I noticed there was a hand up at one point, but has a point been covered or the opportunity missed, or would you still like to contribute? And your office is muted.
No, but yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. The point was covered.
Okay, great. Anything further on this point? No, then on to the next element, Secretary Treasurer.
Sorry, my comment was totally related to the EAs and not the TTOCs, which Julie kindly shifted that to the right answer. So thank you. Yeah, so special purpose funds, there haven't been any changes since the February report. So it looks exactly the same, the totals. The capital fund, there has been one change in that the local capital does accrue interest income. And so interest has increased 12,000 from February. So you'll see that change there. And those are the only changes for those two funds.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands for questions, but maybe that's because I didn't ask. Any questions? Thank you very much, Secretary Treasurer. We're moving along. Next up is the operations update for April 2023. Director of Facilities, is that you?
Hi. So a couple updates. Opens Elementary over the spring break. There's a number of carpenters. Okay. There's a number of carpenters and sorry, my camera's off. Sorry. There's a number of carpenters on site. Sorry, there we go. Okay. There's a number of carpenters on site and some laborers and a number of custodians, and they worked all spring break. Essentially, they erected the shoring in all of the 1912 classrooms. So external pouring has happened outside, and we're waiting on the report to determine what we can do for next steps. So what it's going to take to repair the building. The architect was also the same architect as Willis. So we took a look at the outside of the building at SJ Burnside, sorry. I'll get it right, SJ Burnside. And we were just starting to in the process of looking at cleaning up that site as well. So minor capital. There's a couple of extensions here. We are going to be delaying the HRV installation until the end of this month, just we're waiting for some equipment. Everything is wired and ready to go, just actually the units. Unit upgrades at Mackenzie and the DVC upgrades at Rogers, Frank Hobbs, and South Park.
Marnie, could I just stop you for a sec? I'm not sure if you're in a room with another mic running, but it perhaps you could, that other mic could be muted and you could turn yours on or something of that nature. Just finding it's a little garbled for my poor old ears.
Do you hear me better now?
It's better, thank you.
Okay, do you want me to start over?
Yeah, that would be great, actually.
Okay, so Oaklands Elementary, there was a number of carpenters, custodians, and laborers on site over spring break, and they worked all spring break, and they got the shoring up inside of the 1912 rooms. So all of the 1912 rooms, from boiler room to sensory room to classrooms, had shoring installed, and that was just for safety. So what's happening now is they're pouring the external outside the building, and we're waiting on the report to actually look at how we can do repair that building. So we should get the report within 1 to 2 weeks. And the same architect was used for SJ Burnside. So we are actually looking at installing shoring at SJ Burnside as well. That should happen about 2 weeks' time. So minor capital, we have extended the completion date for the HRV installations to the end of the month, just because we are waiting on the HRVs themselves. So we've pre-wired what we can. So the whole project should be done by the end of April. The unit ventilator upgrade at Mackenzie and the DVC upgrades at Rogers, Frank Hobbs, and South Park are just wrapping up. So they'll be done in a couple weeks' time as well.
Sorry, the sound is not great. We're gonna try to move just to your computer. It's so just give me a second to mute this.
Okay, do you hear me now? Okay, how about now? Ooh, sorry.
Yeah, that's a definite improvement. Thank you.
Okay, so childcare update. The trades are now going to Eagleview and View Royal, and we're planning on having both locations open for September. So we're actually, then once those sites are complete, we'll move over to Lake Hill and Hillcrest and get those open for January opening. Mackenzie, we have trades on site that will do the forming in a couple weeks, and the parking lot should be paved soon if it's not already paved, and then we'll be moving up and working on the staff parking lot around the school. Vic West Portable, we're preparing the schedules to send to the City of Victoria. So the plan is still to have that open for the September school start. And Shoreline, the kids are in the new classrooms, so that's great. We got occupancy over spring break. Operations, they had a very productive month. Lots of the schools received extra cleaning over the 2 weeks of spring break. And then of course the custodians had to clean up after the trades for spring break for all the capital and maintenance projects that we do over spring break. And what can I tell you? And they also kept cleaning the childcare areas and anything to do with community rentals over spring break. So they're super busy. Transportation, The applications for the regular scheduled busing is now closed. We have over 193 registered students on 4 bus routes, and planning is underway for all the routes for next year. Registration is still open for inclusive busing and will remain open until April 28th. To date, we have 303 field trips scheduled, which surpasses last year's overall 116 field trips. And June is fully booked for internal field trips, so we can take no more field trips in June. Grounds, we actually, last year, we purchased a number of mowing equipment and they arrived. So we're able to run 3 grass crews opposed to our 2. So we should get up on the grass cutting this year. And we're actively hiring students to assist with the grounds crew, which we do every summer. We're still continuing the installation of split rail fencing around trees just to ensure they remain healthy. NCIS, the small team is actually focused on tech upgrades at View Royal, Craig Flower, and Torquay. School Wi-Fi coverage upgrades are still underway at a number of schools. Telephone and PA system upgrades have been completed at Rock Heights, and they're currently underway at Marigold, Rogers, and Lambert Park. And our energy manager has just finished out this year's Lights Out sticker campaign, and he won 2 out of 3 categories for the Energy Wise Network winner. And he is now doing, I wish I brought it, but he was doing a little glow in the dark thank you sticker for everybody who participated to remind everyone to turn their lights off. So that's great. And I should also note that all these stickers are printed in-house for a couple of cents, and we keep getting asked by a lot of districts to print them for them. This year, we've finished all our LED upgrades for this year, and we're underway for our audits for next year for, I believe, 6 sites. And then right now, Brian is working on a climate action poster to show the emphasis on closing exterior doors, and he is breaking it down to target the carbon footprint at each of the schools. And then the trustees, I think it was Trustee Kwan that asked a question last I don't even know when it was, last month, about the NLC area at Vic West, and did the proponent provide any funding? So your answer is there if you have any questions regarding that. Is there any questions?
Trustee Kwan.
I have a couple. The first one, actually, I was kind of just hoping, Director, gosh, I'm not even going to attempt your last name because I know I'll butcher it. Marnie. I wondered if there was an update regarding hiring with custodians, where we're at and how that's going.
The summer custodians or the new 5 position custodians?
That we had approved to be hired in addition.
So there has to be, so we've actually met with HR today, and we have a meeting with the union, I believe, this Friday, because it's not as simple as hiring. They are continuing to hire for sure. They'll have the 5 hired, but we have to lay off about 60 people in order to hire. So we're just working on how best to go about doing that, because there'll be about 20 layoffs in order to produce the 20 runs. It's kind of confusing without showing you a flow chart, but it's in process and it will be ready and everybody will be hired and it will be in place by July 1st.
Okay, thank you. So sorry, just to clarify, the layoffs isn't that they're leaving the district, it's that we lay them off to hire them for something else?
100%. We have to lay them off in order to, I guess you could say, a claiming day. So we lay them off, we bring them all into the room, and it's based on seniority who posts into what new position. So because we're creating new daytime positions, we have to lay off all the custodians that have the split runs, and then we bring them together, and then they have to post into the runs based on seniority that they want. And then once those are filled, then we go to the split runs, the 9 split runs that are created. They post in, which will mean there's going to be some nighttime positions that are opened. So then we'll have to do a claiming day for those nighttime positions if anybody wants to move around, and then we'll know how many more positions we have, and we're continually hiring. So we'll have people on the spare board and we'll have people in the new C1 runs in the evening.
Perfect. Sounds complicated. So thank you for the work on that for both you and HR.
No, big thanks to HR and Mark Baggett for that. They do the work for sure.
Great. I have another question, a follow-up question with the trustee question, but I have the feeling that my trustee colleagues may have some more questions about the custodian. So I'll leave that until we're finished with this topic.
Okay, I'll ask a general question. Any questions about custodians? Well, Trustee Duncan, I wasn't sure if that would be the case for you, but
It's actually, if I may, it's about custodians, but not a question so much as I just wanted to acknowledge all of the work that went into cleaning and extra deep cleaning over the break, and just say thank you.
I'll pass it along. Thanks.
back to you, Trustee Kwan.
Yeah, so I just had a couple of follow-ups, and I really do appreciate you, remembering the question and really looking back into it and providing that information. That's great. So I was just curious about, first of all, the funding. So there was the 5.985 million for the NLC specifically, and I believe there was a 1.4 million for the Child Care BC New Space Fund, and I wondered if that 5.985 includes that 1.4, or is that above and beyond that?
No, above and beyond. The childcare funding is completely separate from this project, if you will, on the same land, but separate.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you.
And we should get the permit any day.
Wonderful.
It's going to be good.
Amazing. And if I may, Chair, be as facetious as to go with the second question. Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay, thanks. And so I was curious about the ICA, and yeah, I mean, it's obviously, ICA, it's great to have them right on, right on the premises. I just wondered, as far as it looks like, there's no, as far as I can see from the answer, there's no actual agreement with them, but it was a purpose-built space for them. So I'm curious as to how that worked when, we don't have an agreement, but it's specifically built for them. And do they have an agreement with perhaps the ministry with the funding? I just wondered how that all came about. And then specifically, is there rent that's paid for that space, or, how does that work?
Some of this I'm going to have to defer to either Deb or Katrina. So I wasn't part of the initial conversations, but when we did the PDR, there would have had to been some conversations with the ministry regarding what's going to be in the NLC space. So that would have had to be approved before the building. As far as the funding, I know the funding model is a little different than what they fund NLC now, like the Cedar Hill Middle School. It was a percentage based back then. And then as far as agreements, I'm going to have to defer to Katrina what that might look like in the future.
Yeah, thank you. We haven't worked on any agreements at this point, but I imagine that it would be some kind of joint use agreement with them. We do have similar joint use agreements at other facilities that are used by community partners. So probably we'll need to reach out to them to see what they're looking at. I know the notes that I have seen just said that this was something that still was outstanding.
Sorry, and then, there was just the one thing. So is this like a free space that they can use, or is there some kind of rent that's paid for the use of the space?
That I'm not 100% sure of, but quite often what happens with those agreements is that they pay for the operating costs of it. So both Marnie and I are probably in a similar situation. They're not having that information, but other places where we have agreements, we don't collect rent, but we do collect from them maintenance and operating costs based on the square footage of the space that they're in. So I could probably get more information on that and bring it back to you.
And just for clarification, I don't know, Secretary Treasurer, if you would have this, or perhaps the superintendent, but in this situation, the ICA is using this space, if I understand, to support students at that school, as opposed to basically just carrying on business independent of what is going on at the school. They have another office that they manage. Is that correct? All right, I stumped you. Awesome.
Oh, we're struggling with this muting and unmuting. Yeah, sorry. Again, sorry, echoing. We would, in the past anyways, ICA, as you have said, Chair Painter has provided supports to Vic High students. So I think that's what we would be anticipating moving forward. They do have offices elsewhere.
And if I recall the floor plans, the majority of that space was sort of a multi-use area. That was the majority of the footprint of the NLC, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and so that one that's not a part of the ICAs and will be available to Vic High, teachers and staff, or staff and students on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, there's a servery and a big common area and like a classroom that's all available to the student population. There's washroom access for the students. The storage room could be either or. There's a little classroom and then some offices for the ICA. Whether or not the school can use that classroom during the day, I think that's part of the agreement, but the majority of the NLC is student-based.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just had a couple of questions in relation to another aspect of the report. First, around the metal shops, I'm glad to hear that the line painting, we're anticipating all of the metal shops being completed by September of this year. That's positive news. I wonder whether we anticipate, or if there's a timeline associated with all the other upgrades and improvements that are required for metal shops, if we kind of have a timeline that we're working to complete the rest of them.
In what respect? All the ventilation?
Yeah, the ventilation and all the other kind of list of the health and safety upgrades from the reports a few years ago. Just wondering where we are with completing those in all the metal shops. So things like there was line painting. We had other things around signage, safety equipment. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So we worked on the safety equipment and the eye wash stations, and we've got the lining left. The ventilation, much like the dust collector, we'll have to figure out how to fund that, whether or not it's through SEP, or if we ever get money within the district, then that's going to be a special project. But the safety portions are the parts that we're taking care of now, like all the guards are taken care of, all that type of stuff throughout the district. And then the metal shops, or not the metal shops, the automotive shops, we now have to consult with the teachers and the schools to determine placement of different equipment if we want to work, if we want to move them. So that's kind of next steps. And we're hoping to start that around end of June, beginning of September, since we have the summer that everybody goes on break.
Yeah, that must be much easier. Chair, if I may just follow up on the same subject. So, what I'm hearing then is that sort of by fall, we're hoping to have all this health and safety related elements completed in the metal shops, and then we're going to be turning to automotive. I know we've got the wood shops complete. And so automotive will be in the fall and moving forward. And then what about the aviation shop? Do we have any outstanding work there, or are we completed everything we needed to do there?
No, we've completed everything. We just have a little rack to build for some of their metal storage, which is in the hopper. And then other than that, it's clean. So it's great. And I believe, yeah. And the monthly report that we do internally is ongoing now too for the aviation.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Any further questions? Okay, I had one, and apparently this is my night for brain cramps, but you mentioned when you're discussing the Oakland's shoring up work that you were using the same architect as or planner as SJ Burnside, and I can't recall what was going on at SJ Burnside. Could you remind me?
No, it was the architect that actually built Oakland's was the same architect that built SJ Burnside. So they have similar issues outside. So if you look on the outside, there's some cracking. So yeah, we're not using an architect right now. But we're working on installing the shoring inside of SJ Burnside now.
Okay, thank you for that. And is that how extensive is that going to be at Burnside?
It's quite extensive. It runs through all 3 floors and in any room that has the mullions in them. So it's probably about 12 rooms in total, maybe, just off the top of my head, 12 to 15 rooms roughly. Some are classrooms, number are offices, boiler room. It runs through everything. So anything that has the mullions, we have to put up the shoring.
And is this work that can be completed now, or is it going to be over the summer when the schools are empty?
No, our plan is to install it over a weekend. So we'll do it Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. It should take us about 3 days to get it all up, with guys working about 10-hour days. We're looking at maybe May long weekend or the weekend with the Pro D Day that's coming up pretty soon. We don't want kids in the building is what it is.
Right.
Because they're big metal beams that come up and big metal posts. So the last thing we need to do is have someone get hit.
Yeah, no, understood. I just think do it if you can, do it for the Pro D Day, because doing it over a stat with 10-hour days on a weekend, I don't even want to think what that would cost. But
no, and it's our guys are great. So it's trying to get them. They need a bit of a break over spring break. So we're trying to arrange which weekend they'd like to do. So.
Understood completely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So let's move on with the Vic High seismic project update.
Sure, I'll just scroll down. So the site is progressing well. We do have a few critical pathways that may slow down the project that we're trying to mitigate. We have some mechanical, electrical, and flooring installations that are having a hard time finding a number of trades necessary to complete their work, but we're currently on target to move the students in for January deadline, and there's still lots of optimism that we're going to hit that January deadline. There are trades on every part of the project right now. We have facility carpenters on site actually installing the millwork. The doors for the library common rooms are currently being carved on site. They're carved in the automotive shop right now. The window upgrades are well underway, as is the terracotta and drywall installations. The site's progressing well, and the gravel and the shop pad are scheduled to be installed in May for the turf field, and the volleyball courts are nearing completion. The sidewalk upgrades on Grant and Gladstone Street will start next week and will continue into May. The auditorium painting is well underway, as the electrical and audio upgrades for this space are well underway. The Heritage Corridor ceiling coffers are being built, and there's a picture in the pack-up. They look amazing. And lastly, in the pack-up, there is an old diary that was found in the walls, which is a really neat find. It actually, we gave it to the school archives, but when the school was actually being built, it was one of the trades on site that noted the tasks of the day and prices that things costed at the day. So it's a pretty neat find in our eyes. Yeah, that's about it. Any questions?
One question I had was, have the line items been updated to reflect total budget at this point, or?
Yeah, everything's updated, yes.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, seeing no hands, let's take that as done and move on to the lead report.
I can respond to this as well. So every year we have to provide a lead report to the ministry. This year we had to sample a third of the schools within our district, and the sampling report is there. They were all fine. Next year we have to report a third of the fixtures within every single school. So next year it will look a little bit more, it will look different. So yeah, those are the lead reports that we're hoping to post within the school district website.
So just for clarification, would this be every faucet in a school within a third of the district?
Yes.
So, okay. So yeah, I would just, that's extensive. So thanks very much. Question from Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the report. I guess first I wanted to just acknowledge that of the sources tested, I note that there's been a lot of lead-free fixtures installed since the last report last year. So I just wanted to say thank you for all the effort to install these new fixtures. I think, you know, obviously this is the kind of long-term strategy that really makes a lot of sense and is so important. So thank you, and I wanted to acknowledge that. I also noted from a report that there's a number of drinking water sources that are where we're requiring 30-second flushes again. And in the context of this report, it looks like there's maybe a list or a backlog of filters that need to be installed, and so we're looking for students to flush or to run the water for 30 seconds before drinking. I'm wondering if we can get a bit of an update on what's happening there. Do we have a backlog of filters that need to be replaced? My particular concern is around the elementary schools where we're asking students to flush for 30 seconds. It's always been my concern when we go to this kind of mitigation strategy that, you know, asking elementary age students to even know what 30 seconds feels like is maybe not entirely realistic given their age and stage of development. But I'm wondering if we could get a little context around that.
And I'm honestly I don't want to answer this quite now. I'd like to bring it back to you. Because I believe the water filling stations where the kids like fill up the water bottles are fine. I'm thinking they're the ones in the classrooms that you wouldn't necessarily get water from, but I just want to double check that those are the ones that are actually requiring the 30-second flush. And I know that some of the 30-second flushes custodians were doing in the morning and flushing leads. I'm just not 100% sure. So I'd just like to take it back and answer that one.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, and some of these, just so that you know, what I'm reading here is some of them are water filling stations that are requiring this flush. Some of them are water fountains. It varies. But yeah, if that could be brought back, that would be much appreciated, because I know when this issue came up years ago, when we kind of first discovered this was an issue, we were requiring elementary school kids to, you know, flush for 60 seconds, which is, I think, even more unrealistic. So yeah, much appreciated, Marnie. Look forward to the follow-up.
Okay, I'll find out. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions, comments? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the response to Northridge PAC presentation.
That will be me, Chair.
Okay, Secretary Treasurer, sorry about that. I was just reminding myself about who was leading that one. Thank you.
We put it under facilities because that's kind of where it's at, but I'll speak to it.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just want to acknowledge that Lindsay Plum is here at the meeting. She's representing the Northridge PAC. And I just want to express my appreciation to her for her patience in receiving this information, and also our response on our financial information. We had really hoped to be able to get it to her earlier than this, but we had a lot going on. And so I just wanted to say that to her specifically. I also see that Eric Fisher is here too, and he's been working with the Northridge PAC to resolve the issues that were in their presentation. So just acknowledging his work. He's been fantastic in dealing with this and dealing with the Northridge PAC and in finding something that is satisfactory to them. Just continuing on, we don't ordinarily respond in writing to all of the presentations that we receive, but just acknowledging that we did try to answer some of the questions in the meeting, but some of the answers are quite complex, and just felt that would be helpful to have the responses in writing. And so basically what we wanted to do was to just add a little bit of context around the projects that were going on at Northridge at the time, to provide the final accounting for the project, and then to respond to the 3 questions that were in the presentation. And I realized that the questions were directed to the trustees, so they're welcome to also add their thoughts, but my responses will be from the perspective of facility services and financial services, and the processes that we have in place around school-funded projects, which include PAC-funded projects. So
Okay, thank
just,
you. Oh,
yeah.
sorry, please carry on.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't want to get into the details of who did or didn't attend meetings, but I do want to recognize that the communication on this project was not clear for a number of reasons, and that we have taken steps to ensure that this does not happen again. We've also provided a little bit of context around the school-funded projects at Northridge. So there were multiple projects that were going on around the same time, and obviously not an excuse for anything, but just recognizing that facility services was dealing with quite a complex situation here, and supporting Northridge PAC and funding applications and costing out numerous options for not only the naturescape, but for the other projects that were going on at the same time. So the
Okay,
costing,
oh,
yeah.
sorry, every time you pause, I think you're
Sorry.
finished. So
I'm
I'll just wait.
I have
You
some
let me know
notes
when you're
and
done.
then I'm kind of speaking around my notes. So I just have to refocus. Yeah. Yeah, so let's just look at the costing there. So, and this was provided by the PAC themselves, the original quote for the 60 by 90 naturescape with the balance beam, pathway, and 5 trees with the split rail. That quote was provided in September 2021 at $44,841. And we transferred the funds from the PAC account to school funded projects on September 21st, 2021. In the end, what the school received was a 40 by 40 naturescape with a final cost of $33,891, which left $10,950 unspent in that particular project account. The PAC met with facilities, which included Eric Fisher, on February 6th, and they decided to add multiple log play structures, a level hopscotch, a second balance beam, as well as single logs and wood steps between rocks. And the cost of those enhancements was $15,224. So the total project cost with the enhancements ended up being $49,115. So just over $4,000 overspend, which will be covered by facilities services. While discussing how to make this right, there was a conversation that came up around adding an amphitheater, and facilities really wanted to do this for the school and for the PAC without cost. The estimates for the amphitheater were $15,000 for stone and $13,000 for wood. But we now find ourselves in this situation with a spending freeze, and this fund is in the operating fund. And there is no budget obviously for this, and there's no funds that are underspent in the naturescape to put towards it. And so we are feeling that we are not able to proceed at this time because we need all of if there are any surplus funds in facilities, we will need them in order to offset the deficit in 2023, 2024. And then I'm just moving on to the 3 questions. So the first question was, how can the Board of Trustees support or advise Northridge PAC to respond to the situation that will be described or was described? So our comment is that the ordinary course of action to escalate would be to escalate to an administrator. So either to go to the principal to escalate to the associate superintendent, or through the director of facility services up to the secretary treasurer. And also if the Northridge PAC felt that their concerns were not being addressed, even after all of that, the appropriate action would be to follow our administrative regulation 1155, which is complaint process for a resolution of concerns. And that actually provides some clear process around how to communicate and to deal with issues such as this one. Obviously, we would not want it to go that far, or to come to trustees, we would like to be able to have the opportunity to address any concerns and hopefully resolve them before it gets to that point. And the second question is, how can the situation be changed to avoid repeating for future PACs? And I believe we've already made quite a few improvements to the school funded project process in both facility services and financial services. So in facility services, for example, they've made a change so that the school principal or vice principal and the PAC meet with facility services in person, and avoiding emails, because there's a confusion when there's in-person and email correspondence going on at the same time. And that all meetings that they have are documented in the work order system. So that wasn't happening previously. And then any approvals or changes to scope to be documented within the work order system. So just to make sure that all the communication between PACs and facility services are flowing through the principal, so the principal is aware, and that there's no discussion of projects without all three parties present. And then to go back to bi-weekly meetings and facility services to oversee scope, schedule, and budget for school-funded projects. And in financial services, we made a significant change around the tracking of school-funded projects. So previously, they used to all be lumped into one account with some reference to work orders. Now each project has its own unique subledger, so we can run reports and see the costs that are specific to each project. And those amounts are reported to facilities services monthly. And question 3 was, what is the current required reporting by the school district to the PACs when they are spending PACs money? There is no required reporting currently in place, but we do report to PACs on request. In the past, it has been difficult to do that because all of the costs have been lumped into one GL, so it was quite an onerous task to pull that information out. We did make that change for the 2021-2022 school year. And so we are able to more easily identify project costs, and the reconciliation is done not just annually, but at each month end. However, when we were reviewing the NatureScape costs, we realized that facility services had centralized costs, such as stock materials or bulk purchases of materials that weren't being transferred to individual projects. Because both of these accounts fall under facility services, if one's under and one's over, they just offset each other. And so projects, if you were looking at the total cost, wouldn't have included any of those items. In addition, there is an individual who manages these projects, and their part of their salary and benefits are coded to this account, but those project management costs are not being allocated out to the individual projects. So what happened is that any surpluses in the individual accounts would just offset those costs in the bottom line within that GL account. But if PACs are now going to request an accounting of project, we have to change our practice, and we need to make sure that all of the costs are being allocated to the specific projects. And so to ensure that we have full cost transparency, we're going to implement some further changes. So we will be ensuring that all project costs are allocated to school-funded projects. So that includes the project share of centralized costs and a project management fee, which we're setting at 10%, and we'll just assess whether or not that is the appropriate amount once it's implemented. I'll just note that for the NatureScape, we did allocate 1.5% of project management costs. So there was something there, but didn't want to allocate the full 10%. And then lastly, upon completion of projects for PACs, we will complete a reconciliation of the actual costs against the estimated costs. And the estimated costs are what the PAC pays upfront. And we will either refund if it's underspent or invoice if it's overspent. We can provide detailed expenses and invoices upon request. So we have provided that to Lindsay so that she can see the detailed expenses and review the invoices and let us know if she has any concerns about that. And I think one more comment on that is that PACs will just need to be aware when they're fundraising that if there's a big gap between when the estimate is made and when the project's completed, there could be cost escalation. And we may want to look at building in a contingency. The other thing we talked about is not, like we could give out costs, but not projecting estimates out multiple years in advance, like trying to keep our costs more current so that they're within the next few months only. And in closing, just want to acknowledge that Facility Services works with many of our educational partners and does its very best to provide services and source materials at the lowest possible cost. In this particular project, there was a facility services staff member who cut down trees on his own property and donated them to a value of $900 to reduce the cost for this project. And I also want to acknowledge the great efforts that PACs make to raise funds for and support schools with much needed and much appreciated resources, including play spaces like the Naturescape at Northridge. And we really do want to continue to strengthen that cooperative relationship with PACs and build trust in the systems that we now have in place to support PAC-funded projects. And I feel confident that the improvements that we have made to the school-funded projects in review of this particular project in particular should help to prevent this from happening again. Thank you. And I believe Lindsay may have some questions as well.
Yes, I was going to see if Eric wanted to offer any additional things and then turn over to Lindsay. Eric, did you have a desire to contribute at this point or?
Not at this point. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah,
thank
okay.
you.
Not at this point. I think Katrina said everything I was going to say. So I'll just hold off for the questions.
Thank you. And much appreciated you taking the time out to be available for us tonight.
Not a problem. My pleasure.
Thank you. Lindsay, please, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for letting me chime in here. And you know, first, definitely want to make sure that all of the credit here goes to Eric. We have a wonderful Flores Lava exercise facility now, just as little second grade Micah specifically requested of you, Eric. So kids are certainly loving the new space. And so just kind of going back a little bit to the report in general, Katrina, and sharing some of my thoughts on the feedback on our 3 questions. For the first question, you mentioned that conflict resolution and that there's a specific protocol for that. And in the processes that have been updated, I would recommend that that is something that is explained to PACs ahead of time. There is absolutely no way that a parent would know what the conflict resolution process was if you don't tell them. And that certainly was never described to us. So if that is an expectation of the PAC, then letting them know that. And then in response to the answer to number 2, requesting in-person meetings as opposed to emails, I think is extremely problematic because it doesn't allow for written correspondence. And if their in-person meetings is what is, the expectation moving forward, that, there should be some process for, things like minute taking, because how else do you ever get back on the same page? So I think the request of eliminating or prioritizing in-person meetings over email correspondence is problematic. And so those are just my two thoughts on the sort of some of the changes that you mentioned in response to our questions. I will say it's quite disappointing that we have a offer of an amphitheater being reneged, when I do fully understand that there's a spending freeze, and I know that there's lots of budget requirements. But given that we're in April, this is probably not a project that would have been done until next year anyways. It was an offer made by the district, and it was an offer accepted by the PAC. So to be reneged after acceptance just doesn't feel awesome. I think that there's better ways that could have been handled. So now the questions that I submitted ahead of time are in response to the report itself. In the report, you mentioned that there was a lot of changes and different projects going at the same time, different pieces of funding that were coming in, specifically the community grant, the federal grant that we received, and how much of an impact that had, and the changes that were made to our naturescape because of the federal grant. However, the ground was broken for this project of the naturescape in March of 2022. All decisions had been made prior to breaking ground, of course, and we didn't find out that we were accepted for this federal grant until April. So to use the grant as a reason for changes to be made is just not accurate. One had nothing to do with the other. We had already started the project prior to that. So I don't think that's an accurate representation of the timeline or of the reasons that this project didn't go according to plan. So I was just curious on, maybe there's something that we're not understanding. How did project number 2 impact project number 1 in the way that is being described in the report? I do have some other questions, but I'll kind of go one by one.
I can answer. I'll take a stab at that one if you want. It didn't impact the Naturescape project on a whole per se, but was one of the major, many projects on the site that facilities had to manage at no cost to the PAC. Facilities had to meet with the contractor a number of times, answer questions, ensure all documentation was complete for the building permit, and approve the shelter placement. During the shelter installation, facilities assisted the contractor a number of times with questions that arose, and assisted on site with equipment, getting the equipment down and equipment down. So it didn't really affect the naturescape, but it was part of the whole project that was taking place at Northridge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was our perspective of it as well, Eric. But that is not how it's described in the report from Katrina.
Okay.
Katrina, Secretary Treasurer.
Thank you. Yeah, in the report, there was no intention to say that project was the reason why the changes were made to the other. It was more to recognize that there was a lot going on for facilities services at that time, and many changes and many different things going on, which is probably why the communication wasn't as solid on that particular project. But if my report implies that the federally grant funded project is why that project got reduced, that's not my intention.
Awesome. Okay, so we are on the same page, and it was just how the report read then. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you. Also in the report, it stated that one of the, that the challenge, you termed it as a communication breakdown. And when I look through emails, I'm just not quite sure what you mean by a communication breakdown. We were fully in communication. And so when you say that, what are you meaning? That there, what caused this communication breakdown?
There was a meeting that not all people were involved in, where the size of the naturescape went from 60 by 90 to 40 by 40. And I cannot find that anywhere in any email, in any work order floor, anywhere. But I know there was a person-to-person meeting. That's why we're trying to get rid of the person-to-person meeting and get everything documented properly. But with the person-to-person meeting to get the plan going. Make sense?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
There was a meeting. We know there was a meeting. I know who was involved with the meeting, but there's no documentation saying we're going from 90 by 60 to 40 by 40.
Okay. And that, I think that also aligns, Eric, with my understanding of the process. And so, I mean, my request would be that it is not characterized as a communication breakdown. That sounds that had nothing to do with the communication in the PAC or with the school, from my understanding, that if the district, if facilities changed the project after it was agreed upon, I would not characterize that as communication breakdown.
But what I'm getting at is there was a meeting with facility staff, the PAC, and the school. And
there was no meeting that discussed that with the PAC.
Because there's nothing, we cannot find anything in any work order that says we're going from 60 by 90 to 40 by 40. But I do have a person saying there was a meeting.
There was guaranteed absolutely zero meeting that ever discussed 40 by 40 with anybody at the school. The only person that meeting could have been with is Reed Jorgensen, who has not been in any of these conversations, but it was certainly not with the PAC or with the vice principal, that we know for sure. So Katrina, my request would be that the report has changed. It is not a communication breakdown. It is something different, which can be characterized however you thought was more appropriate. But communication breakdown, I don't think is accurate. And then my final question. I was able to find $1,700 in labor allocated to this project in July of 2022 and October 2022. The project was finished, completed, and fences came down in June 2022. And we didn't start discussions again with Eric until 2023. So there was no labor that happened in July or October because the project was completed. So I do have some questions on how $1,700 was spent in labor on a completed project.
I traced that labor back to work order 82064, and that was for trees and plants and split rail that was put up in those 2 months. So not for the naturescape itself, but up top, the planting, the shrubbery, that sort of thing.
Okay. Okay. So that was for the plants, not the naturescape, and it was just incorrectly noted in the reporting system. So those are all my questions. Thanks so much for answering them. Finally, Katrina, I will be in contact again. You generously sent me 47 attachments at the end of your day on Friday, which I have not had a chance to get through before today. However, I have already come across 3 that I have absolutely no idea why they're included, including an invoice for stairs, which we have none of. So that is giving me the motivation to look through all 47 invoices with a finer tooth comb, because I'm concerned at what is included in that package.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Lindsay. Open it up for questions. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, not so much a question, but just more an observation. I just want to acknowledge that, you know, when these kind of things happen, when a project kind of goes off the rails, so to speak, to some extent or another, you know, there's always context, there's always reasons. And I think, you know, from my perspective, the really important point is that we use it as an opportunity to grow, to learn, to refine our processes, and to kind of consider the different perspectives of the folks that are affected. Obviously, there's a mutual benefit to both the PACs and the district cooperating on these projects, because it benefits the kids, right? And so, and we all want that. So I just want to say, you know, first of all, to Lindsay and her fellow PAC members at Northridge, you know, and this has already been communicated by our Secretary Treasurer, but just to acknowledge, you know, that there's been some difficulties, and to thank you for your patience. But I also want to acknowledge the Secretary Treasurer's efforts on this, because there's been significant engagement with the process and how it might be improved upon in order to ensure that these projects, you know, are executed as efficiently and as clearly as possible, and that there's a higher degree of transparency possible, because the systems in place support that. And I, you know, everybody is dedicated to the same goal ultimately. So I just want to say thanks to everybody here, including Eric, you know, for helping work together to get to that place where we are more confident that our systems will support these kinds of projects moving forward. And I think obviously there's some dialogue that will happen behind the scenes in order to progress this further, but just want to say thanks to all of you this evening. And the only other thing I just want to comment on is moving forward. I mean, and again, this is a subject for discussions maybe between all of you, but just around the possibility of what could happen in, you know, next financial year. There's nothing to, you know, there's nothing to prevent us from looking at what's possible in the next financial year. But I'll leave that for all of you to discuss. And just again, thank you to everybody for your engagement. This isn't easy when things break down, but the fact that everybody's come to the table in a solutions-oriented manner is hugely appreciated.
Thank you, Trustee Duncan, and move on to Paula.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Trustee Painter, Chair Painter.
Rob works too.
I just wanted to just sort of echo what Nicole said, just on behalf of VC PAC, that it is often, you know, quite difficult for parents to come to a school board meeting and to, you know, address concerns at their school and or things that are going on with their PAC. And Lindsay really has done an absolutely phenomenal job as far as advocating for her school and her PAC and the students at her school. You know, I was actually had written some questions to ask, and she actually asked all of them, you know, and I just think she's being extremely articulate. She's really, really showing great support, and it is very heartening to see how the school district is working together so that hopefully these problems will not be, you know, so that these problems can be addressed in the future and we won't have the same kinds of issues going forward. But I just wanted to give a tip of the hat to Lindsay for definitely sticking with this and advocating. It's really very much appreciated. And what you've done, I think, will help a lot of schools in the district when PACs are fundraising and, you know, trying to make their schools better.
Thank you very much, Paula. And on to Trustee Kwan.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to pull the amphitheater conversation again and just really, you know, dig into that. First of all, just kind of wanted to, you know, suss out where funds would come from. I think right now we're looking at a spending freeze on discretionary funds. So just wanted to confirm that any funds that would be spent on the amphitheater would be considered discretionary funds.
I think also there was a significant amount of funding that was contributed from facilities to help to balance the budget this year. And it's quite possible that the funds were included in that allocation. as opposed to the specific spending freeze. Not trying to speak for anyone, just suggesting that there were a couple of the different ways that facilities budget was reduced.
Yeah, I think the budget that was contributed is for next year's budget, not this year's budget. So I wonder about
Good
this.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Secretary Treasurer, please.
I think I can try and answer that. So school funded projects is an account that's held in the operating fund, and funds are transferred into it from various schools or departments to specifically fund projects that facility services completes. And so it's not like there's any budget that's sitting there for discretionary items. So if we were to proceed with building either the stone or the wood amphitheater, we would be incurring costs within the operating fund to which there's no budget. So basically, we would be putting ourselves into a deficit position for year end for that particular project. So I guess I stand to be corrected if that is not discretionary, because it was offered and accepted by the PAC, but I don't know at the time if there was an understanding that there may be some surplus funds in the Escape project or how that was going to be funded. But yeah, I don't know if others feel that that is not discretionary. There are not funds there to support it. So that was my concern, is that we are going the other way. So we're asking schools and departments not to spend, not to travel, not to have food, and then to incur. It's a fairly large amount for this project in the current year. Next year, like Chair Duncan said, perhaps we may be in a different situation. I'm not sure. We don't have budget sitting there for projects. They get moved in. The only thing I could think of is if there was a surplus from somewhere else that could be allocated, but that would be a conversation with facility services.
Okay, and Marnie, I saw a hand and now I don't see a hand. So are you passing on this conversation?
No, I don't know how to use the hands very well. No, I was
okay.
just going to say, my understanding is when there was discussion with the amphitheater, there was a belief that there was going to be a extra money left within the project that we could spend on the amphitheater. And right now it's 4,000 and change over budget. So it's at that time we thought that there was going to be money within the budget, and it's opposite now.
Trustee Kwan. Oh, that was just a vestigial hand. Yes. Okay.
I left it up too long. Sorry.
Yeah. A couple of observations, because I'm never short of comments. One is that it seems clear to me that if the measures taken to ensure that there is a consistent flow of communications makes sense, I would question whether if that consistent flow of communications is being addressed, whether email is any better or worse than in-person meetings. I'm just thinking that a PAC generally has an obligation to consult with its membership and isn't necessarily as able in every situation to provide an answer at an in-person meeting relative to, people who are formally empowered with authority, et cetera. And so it just a point for consideration. I think the big issue, if I'm understanding things, is that there's a clearly understood flow of communications. Now, with respect to the work orders, does the principal have access to that work order list? Is that something that, as things are updated, that the principal is able to access and then share that information with the PAC? Because the other side of that communication is making sure that everyone is on the same page.
Yeah, I
Did
can
I-
definitely speak
okay.
to that. The principals and the vice principals both have access to that system. So the plan is to meet in person, discuss, and then the notes go into that work order system. Whether the notes go in by facilities or whether the notes go into by the principals or the VPs, that's kind of where the notes reside at the end of the meeting. So there will be notes taken. They will reside in the work order system. And then if there's any changes, that's where the changes and all the approvals will go completely through the work order system. So no approvals happen through emails. It's all through the work order system. So the principals and the VPs can see that dialogue back and forth, and facilities can see it as well.
Okay, the one additional thing is making sure that the PACs are included there as well. And I would obviously assume that that's the administrator's responsibility, but the PAC is a key issue. I got some others, but I'll offer Trustee Bayo an opportunity to contribute as well.
Yeah, I was thinking on the same topic, and maybe someone said this earlier and I missed it. But do we ever just send, like, when two people finish or people finish an in-person meeting, they send an email to everyone in the meeting with even just like a last minute, like, okay, we agreed, we said X, Y, and Z today, and I'm going to email that to all of us so we have a record. And then even if the decision wasn't made, like the PAC representative has to go back, they have that note to fall back on and say, well, this was what we talked about on this date. Like, are we doing that, or is that something we could do?
That was not done during this Northridge program. There's a lot of lapses, but that's where we're going. Every project moving forward, these they're called conversations on the eBase. That's our work order system. That's where they'll be going. And then anybody that's involved in that conversation that has access in eBase can see exactly what's written down.
Okay. One other item that going forward that just sort of jumped out at me is that recognizing that fundraising as a PAC can be a real struggle at times. And so the idea of an after project invoice is one that would cause some concerns for me. With that in mind, I think that there would have to be an ongoing tracking of expenditures, and then an opportunity for the PAC to make a decision before incurring additional costs if the expectation is going to be delivering an invoice at the end. I think they would need to be in a position to say yay or nay to something if costs are going beyond the original estimates. And that's just informed consent in my mind. There might be one or two others, but I doubt this is going to be the only time that we talk about it. Oh, the last one. And, you know, this can be a topic for another day because I expect that it's probably a little more complex than I appreciate. I can certainly understand the fact that there is a project management component to this. I'm not sure if I've actually settled on an opinion in that respect, that is necessarily a cost that should be passed on to PACs. But I do understand how the costs are incurred, and I'd like to learn a little bit more about that model. You know, what are the other elements that contribute to that individual's salary, and how is it addressed in quiet years, et cetera. So I'm not looking for an answer right now. But the thing that I keep coming back to in my own mind is that these resources that PACs are contributing through their fundraising are district resources. You know, certainly with the province now contributing a whole playground a year, or sometimes two, you know, I think that we're moving into the reality that playgrounds are a part of the facilities that we deliver. And I'm not trying to offload that onto facilities department, just saying that as a school district, playgrounds are just part of what makes up school environments. And so I'm just curious, I'd like a little more information to better understand why this project would be managed differently than another project when it comes to project management oversight. And if all projects are addressed in this manner, then that's a good thing for me to know, to learn about. Julie, I saw a finger. Not necessarily the other finger, but yes.
Did you want me to take a stab at some sort of
If you would like to, but no obligation.
So there's a number of facilities capital staff who are not funded in the operating budget. They're strictly funded out of capital projects. So each month we figure out what time that what a portion of what their time has been spent on, and we allocate their time out accordingly. So historically, the portion related to school-funded projects just gets thrown in as a lump sum and not allocated to projects. That being said, a portion of their time still is spent on all the school-funded projects, which would include, for example, the Northridge PAC, Northridge Playground. So yeah, there's the rationale for recording their time there is that their time has to be covered from somewhere, right? So any external funding we receive, any ministry funding, these project manager salaries, and the capital staff who do labor work on the projects themselves, the times are all allocated to these projects. What's not factored in is all the additional administrative time that's spent on these projects. Like my time, for example, is fully funded through the operating fund. So we don't charge projects like that any portion for my salary. That being said, you know, with the funding agreements, there's been a significant amount of my time that has been, you know, going through all the PAC invoice or all the invoices. I had to do a 2.5-hour training session along with a couple other district employees just on the reporting for the grant that was received. So there is a significant amount of time that's not charged, right? But it is capital staff that we do have to recover their time.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Lindsay, I see a hand.
I just wanted to respond a little bit to the allocation of salaries. The property owned by the school district has been upgraded at no cost to them other than these salaries. And to suggest that the PAC should pay the salaries to upgrade the real estate value and the educational value to these students, I think is ridiculous.
You're finding it challenging. No,
I'm finding
I
it
can understand.
challenging.
And this is where I was interested in more information, because I can certainly see your side of the story, and you know, I have, along with, where's Paula? Is Paula still there? Yeah, we were involved in a playground project at our kids' elementary school. So you know, it's not the first time this conversation has come up, and I do want to ensure that that all of the costs that are going to PACs for these projects are reasonable and appropriate, because I do agree that these are valuable contributions to our school district assets. So that's definitely something that I'll continue to look into and I'll be happy to share the information that I have going forward. And that's not to exclude my trustee colleagues, just to say that I'm inspired. So I'll do some work. Yes, Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, I just had one final thought I wanted to share, just based on this sort of last points. I think that what I'm hoping to see anyways moving forward is just some clarity around what portion is district contributed and what portion is PAC. I think that's really just what it's about, because I think we do acknowledge that when a playground goes in as a result of PAC funding, that's an enhancement that is of benefit to all the students. And we appreciate it when PACs do work so hard to raise the monies in order to help upgrade facilities, and because it does benefit students. But I think the issue really is just around a clear and consistent process and practices as it relates to both the accounting and also from a policy perspective, what are we contributing as a district, so that it's fair as well moving forward, so that all PACs are treated in the same manner when it comes to the district contribution. So I think it's just clarity, and I think we're getting there. That's what I'm hearing tonight anyways, we're getting there.
I saw superintendent's hand and the associate secretary treasurers, but I'm going to go with the superintendent, and rank has privileges on all that.
Thank you, Chair Duncan, or Chair Painter. I think just another piece, and I don't want to belabor the conversation, but I do think it would be helpful to bring back information with regards to maintenance, because that is not necessarily factored in or not factored into the cost. So while we do experience different playgrounds and naturescapes going in, we also now have a liability to maintain it and redo them when they become issues within the district. So I think this is all to say, I think there's a lot more information that would be helpful, or some more information to round out this discussion, because there are costs that come back to the district in order to maintain what is placed, and they're not factored in the initial cost of the build.
Oh, that's a fair observation. Associate Secretary Treasurer, was that your point, or do you have another point?
No, sorry, my very last comment on this, just addressing Lindsay's comment. I completely understand that it is the district's contribution. It's just the budget piece, right? We don't have a budget for these capital staff who work on these projects. So we have to attribute their time to whatever they're working on. So if the time that was spent on the playground was then allocated either to another project, then we would be overcharging that project for the time spent on a playground, or we would have to fund it out of operating, which we all know how much money there is in operating right now. So that's my final word. Thanks.
Understood. So just as has been mentioned, my last thought is don't lose the plans for the amphitheater, and we'll definitely have a look at it next year. Any other comments, contributions, observations? Seeing none, we have no public disclosure of in-camera items tonight. So we're moving on to new business, and I will hand the floor over to Trustee Kwan.
Right, yeah, I just have a motion to submit tonight, and I believe, conversations have happened since I submitted it that might need some amendments, but what I'll do is I'll read the motion as submitted, and then we can open for discussion, I would hope, through Chair Painter, and talk about it a bit. So as read, my motion was that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the superintendent to commence the pilot of elementary strings for the 2023-24 school year in 6 schools, and further report back to the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, no later than the February 2024 board meeting on the successes as well as challenges of the pilot program, and further consult rights holders and stakeholders, including GVTA and BC PAC, either virtually or in person prior to reporting to the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, and further survey student participant families, music teachers, and school administrators to collect feedback on the pilot program prior to reporting to the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria.
Okay. Did you want to offer any additional detail at this point, or shall we open it up for discussion?
Well, I wonder, do we need to put it on the floor before we do, or?
Well, certainly,
Shall
but you
I
effectively.
motion it,
Oh,
yeah, exactly. So the only thing that I might adjust right away is, first of all, you know, in the very beginning of it, where it says for the 2023-24 school year in 6 schools, I might be inclined to add in school year in up to 6 schools, you know, depending on whether schools, I know schools need to elect to have this. So it's possible that we might not find 6 schools. So if we could add the wording, if I don't know if we need to vote on an amendment or do a friendly amendment where it would just be up to between in and 6.
Trustee Duncan, is your observation on this point?
It is,
Please go
yeah, I
ahead,
just
then.
actually had an amendment I wanted to move around that exact piece, but I'm happy to make an amendment to an amendment or however things pan out.
Okay, the one point I am mindful about is that we were using fairly sharp pencils with the budget deliberations and covering off 6 schools with the cost associated with prep time was a part of that discussion. So if we're reducing that, then in theory, we have additional budget for the program that's going to have to be found somewhere else. Is this a follow-up, Trustee Duncan?
No, I'm just wondering procedurally if we're going to discuss the amendment, like is Trustee Kwan making an amendment or, okay.
But Trustee Kwan, you initially had suggested that you might want to change the language to up to 6 schools. Is that your proposed amendment to this motion?
I think I'll hold off on that amendment only because I think it sounds like Trustee Duncan may have an amendment. If I were to make the amendment, she'd have an amendment anyway. So I'd rather just see what amendment she has, and I would withdraw and not forward that amendment.
And Ms. Marchese, I did see your hand. I'll get to you once we get the procedural stuff out of the way. Trustee Duncan, did you have a proposed amendment?
Yeah, I did for this piece. So what it would read is, after the superintendent, it would then read, to identify up to 6 schools interested in participating in a pilot of elementary strings for the 2023-24 school year. So, and just if I may, Chair, so what I'll do is first of all, just copy this text into the chat so everybody has the amendment available. And then, yeah, what I was trying to achieve is not sort of second guessing what the board has directed in the context of the budget process. I think that's right, but I think acknowledging that there does need to be some flexibility for staff who are having to implement it from a more practical sense. So there are some discussions that have to take place, obviously at the school-based level and amongst the senior leadership team who's engaged in those discussions to identify schools that are interested. So I know we in the budget process wanted to identify 6, but again, I think the wording really is just meant to acknowledge that there are discussions that need to take place in order to identify 6 schools that want to take part in the pilot. And I'm hoping that wording achieves that, allows for that flexibility, or just acknowledges that flexibility.
Okay, any comments, discussion about the amendment? And yes, consistent with our approach, I will go to our stakeholders and members first and then open it up for trustee debate. So, Cindy.
Thank you. So just let me just read that amendment, to identify up to 6 schools. Okay, so that's better than it was. However, I think from the beginning, I sent a letter to trustees on January 13th at that time as the music LSA president, that we were against strings as prep. And from what I understand, and I outlined different reasons why, and as the GVTA representative, I have to say, so far as strings as prep, this motion breaks our collective, it violates our collective agreement because there hasn't really been any consultation with the union. So that's Article A2. There hasn't been at this point in time any consultation at the school level, which breaks Article A23. Have we checked to see if the schools actually want it at the schools? So I guess through this motion, hopefully the schools will go through their staff committee process, because at this point in time, as far as I understand, the schools have not really been given any choice. They've just been told, as far as I know, I could be wrong, that this is going to happen, whether you like it or not. I'm rephrasing it. I'm sure it was phrased a lot better, but that's how the teachers have interpreted that. These cuts, this will cut people's work. People could lose parts of their job. It doesn't guarantee that these jobs will be desirable or positions will be desirable. Strings teachers often have jobs at other schools, and it's difficult to coordinate schedules. Also, for example, if you're at a school with the music teacher as prep, that's already full-time. And particularly if they're not qualified to teach strings, then that their portion of their FTE may be cut so that to accommodate the strings teachers. So we're essentially kind of cutting music in a way to support strings. And in that instance, you're breaking Article C20, which is the principle of security, because depending, the longer that teachers work in this district, they should have the security of their jobs, and they may lose parts of their jobs or claim access to needs to be full-time at a different school. There's just a lot of other issues, like I don't think the CMSLC, the Cooper Smith Music Library Collection, I don't think they have the number of instruments to supply to students for 6 classes, let alone the rest of the district. I'm worried about costs of repair if we make this mandatory. It'd be nice if it was a choice for kids to take still, but I think that was already discussed. I think that's where I'll leave it for now. Those are the main concerns that we have as a union.
Thank you very much, Cindy. I wonder if I could look to someone with senior administration who could, is anyone in a position to clarify what the appetite of schools has been to prep time, and whether or not, perhaps if it's known if they have music teachers who are qualified to teach strings?
This would.
Through the chair, I can answer some of these things, recognizing that it will take some time to come back to some of the other items that were mentioned this evening. So just just to clarify, after the budget meeting, we did reach out to administrators to ask of the elementary schools which ones thought they might be able to do this. And we received responses from all of the schools that 4 maximum could do this. Given the timeline for staffing, that was between Tuesday morning and Tuesday afternoon when staffing packages went out. After the staffing packages went out, the 4 administrators met with the staff committees in those 4 schools and heard from the 4 schools that they did not approve of this going as a prep. So we are holding right now, looking for next steps, but as process piece, administrators first answered that they could make this happen without, and they did recognize they were going to go back to staff committee, but in the timeline that they had to respond, went back to staff committee, heard from staff committee that they did not agree with this. And we are where we're at this evening. We have reached out to ask the number of instruments that would be required based on those 4 schools, and we have that information, but I think we're right now, as has been articulated, there are lots of other considerations to follow up with at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Superintendent. I appreciate that. Paula.
Thank you, Chair Painter. Just on behalf of VCPAC and Amos, I just wanted to register some of our input and perhaps ask a few questions. I guess from the perspective of VCPAC, the most attractive part about doing a pilot prep proposal is that it does make strings more equitable. I mean, it does mean that that by having the grade 5s participate in the program, that everybody gets to do it. And also it brings strings back into the timetable, which has been a concern of VCPAC's this year, that the elementary strings program in many schools has now gone outside of the timetable, which means it is not equitable for all students. We've heard from many families whose kids cannot participate because they have obligations before or after school, or they need to play and run around at recess. So that still remains a concern of ours as far as the elementary strings program, not part of prep. However, I do want to echo Cindy, I guess just because I've been part of fundraising for the Cooper Smith Music Library as far as the instruments go. And I'm just wondering, when the board approved the budget, did they set aside an allocation for instruments for the pilot?
No, there was not a specific allocation for additional instruments.
Can that amount be added then? Because that will surely be an added expense unless that money is raised privately.
No, that's a good point. And Trustee Duncan, can you refresh my memory?
Yeah, so during the budget process, the question of whether there would be sufficient instruments available was asked. And the thought was that for the amount of schools that we were looking at, that would be likely that there would be, but that confirmation would be sought. So
yeah, that's right.
It sounds like staff have gone away and sought confirmation of how many instruments are in fact available. So obviously that would have an impact on, what could be tried this school year.
Yeah,
that's right. And I mean, just because the elementary strings program will hopefully be running in the other schools, I guess it depends what schools, if we are able to get, like, for example, if we have schools like Sir James Douglas and Willows, which have huge grade 5 classes, that would be, an added, if it's the big schools, it would be much more difficult than the smaller schools. I know one of the other concerns was the actual space, like that enough space is needed to be able to teach these specialized classes. Like, you can't exactly bring a trolley of violins and violas into a class. So I guess as far as some of these schools that volunteer, or that hopefully will volunteer, that might be part of reasons why they might not be able to do it, is because their school might not have enough space to be able to operate the program. And then I just want to echo that, to teach this class, we need to have specialized music teachers. That, as great as our music teachers are throughout the district, and I've gotten to know many of them over the past couple of years, we do need specialized teachers to teach elementary strings. And even now there's a shortage of those teachers in the district. So that is also just a concern, that however, if the pilot motion does get approved, we'll just need to make sure that those teachers have the flexibility within their schedules to be that if they need to teach at more than one school, that they'll be able to, somehow make this work, which I know in the past has been difficult as far as placing those teachers. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you very much for that. Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, just so that we're all on the same page. My understanding of the motion that's being brought forward today, setting aside the amendment, if you will, for a moment, but the intention really is to map out a review process so that we're, there's an acknowledgement that there's discussions that need to be had and with schools about who might be interested in participating, where we've heard from the superintendent that those conversations have started, and obviously there's some challenges. However, my understanding of the motion is that it's trying to map out a framework, if you will, some direction from the board around what a review of the pilot would look like. So, I think we're not going to be able to answer all the questions around what the pilot itself, looks like, because those discussions are ongoing and there is some complexity. But I'm hoping that we can at least have a discussion so that we can give some direction as a board to staff about what a review of any successful pilot might look like, appreciating that, we might hear back after conversations have occurred that we need to rethink this. But again, the intention is to look at what a review of a pilot would look like.
And looking for hands, not seeing hands. Add my 2 bits. I'm mindful of that as well, and I actually wonder if it's appropriate to move forward with this motion, or instead to strike a working group with representatives from teachers, parents, administration, and a trustee or two to actually come together to identify a path, a proposal, a possible path forward that could provide the basis for recommendations. And I understand that it's a complex situation that's not going to get solved in a day, but it occurs to me that rather than have a motion that's going to go out, get tested, and then come back with possibly significant changes recommended, or to just do the work first and then come up with a motion. I kind of like this latter option, but I defer to my colleagues, of course. Trustee Duncan, and then back to Cindy after that.
So I just want to clarify. So are you suggesting that we table the motion tonight and then come up with another option for what a review of the prep pilot would look like? Or are you saying that there's actually the need for further involvement of a committee in identifying schools that might be interested?
My thought had been to table this motion and to instead propose a motion to strike a working group to meet, very soon, within the next couple weeks, to initiate a discussion about a framework for moving forward with not only the strings program, but an evaluation of the effectiveness of different options for delivering that program for next school year. And that would provide the basis for a recommendation to come back possibly in a month or 2 months. We have until June. Just something to mull over. Cindy.
I think you have to keep in mind the staffing packages have gone out to schools, and to have, what am I trying to say? So let me lower my hand. I'm distracting myself. Okay. that if you want to have this review in the next few weeks, it will greatly impact jobs and how things are posted, which is really a lot of the GVTA's concern is about the potential loss for work and for current prep teachers being laid off, declared excess to needs. And this review process that's in the motion would come after possible loss of jobs. So I think what's difficult about this is the timeline is so short. It's so short because it will impact jobs in schools and staffing.
And I do understand the complication of the staffing packages having gone out. But it would be my understanding, and please clarify this point for me, that a part of this discussion was focused on the idea that because of language adjustments in the collective agreement, that there's going to be an increase in prep time allocated per teacher, and that I believe the expectation, misguided or not, was that this is something that could be used to fill out that the full allocation of prep time, which would be greater than in previous years. So I think it was my sense that it might limit how that additional prep time was used, but I don't think it would be a guaranteed reduction in any current position. And of course, I stand to be corrected, and I know that that's going to vary from one school to the next. Lots of moving parts, but I'm concerned that if we don't move forward with something in fairly short term, then the next option is, well, maybe we scrap the whole program. And I don't think that anyone is going to be looking forward to that. Superintendent, I see your hand. I would love to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Chair Painter. I think a couple of things is, one has already been mentioned, the staffing packages are out and they're due to return very soon. To redo staffing would be very impactful to school staff, to teachers, and to the human resource department that would be doing all of this work. Based on the feedback, as I mentioned, that we have received from the 4 schools staff committee, they are not in favor of this. So I'm not optimistic that there will be any schools that will step forward. So we may not be able to review or do a review of the pilot because we have no schools volunteering. The only thing that would be is that the board directs that this happens. So I think we're just in this place where there's still a lot of things to be determined, but I don't think, as we're sitting here now, that we may see 4 schools. We may not see any schools step forward to pilot this.
Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm thinking 2 things. One, I would be interested to hear what, if any, concerns schools have about this. I think, you know, if we're gonna get to a point where we can test this in the school year, then I think we have to get to the bottom of what the concerns are. And then I guess second of all, you know, in my view, there's no urgency in terms of setting out what the review process would look like. We could very well just table this and let the discussions unfold as it relates to identifying potential schools to pilot this. You know, there's nothing to say. I mean, the review was intended to happen, you know, at some stage after the pilot, or, you know, near the end of the pilot, I would assume, once folks had had an opportunity to see how it worked. So it's not urgent. We could table it, but I do think if we are going to see this actually work, then we're going to have to be kind of open about what some of the concerns are and see if we can't come to some kind of way forward.
Yes, it also seems like, given our different challenges, that we may have to consider changes to the budget process in future years so that we can make decisions about programs of this sort well in advance of when staffing is going to occur. Even if
Yeah, maybe
that
if
may
we
not-
will move, sorry, Chair, I think I will just move to table because I don't know if we're gonna get where we need to get this tonight. So maybe I'll just cut to the chase and say, let's table this motion to a future date when some further discussions can occur. And then say that, you know, I think we do need as a board to hear what some of the concerns are so that, you know, we can hopefully support some solutions moving forward.
Any comments regarding table? Trustee Kwan.
I would agree. I think Trustee Duncan has spoken most of most of what my intention was with this motion was just to, you know, ensure that we are doing that process and really, you know, finding out what those challenges are and what the successes would be of a program like this. But it does sound like there's a lot more conversation to happen, and it's not urgent to have, you know, something in place as far as how we would find that out. So I completely agree. I think tabling this motion is probably the best thing to do at this point.
The one question I always have is, does the recommendation or the unspoken recommendation from the budget of up to 6 schools in prep, does that still stand as a request to the superintendent to see if there is an appetite for any schools to look at this as part of prep? And I understand, I just for clarification purposes so that everyone's clear. My sense is that with staffing packages going out, that we're probably not in a very flexible situation to address this. I understand that my sense is that we've got a lot of issues to unravel here regarding this matter. All right. Seeing as how it's just me rambling on, show of hands to table. All those in favor? And that's unanimous. Thank you very much, trustees. We have 2 more recommended motions. Last page, Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I just, so the first one was just that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the policy subcommittee to recommend a policy and regulation on international student enrollment with particular reference to the Surrey School District policy and regulation, and further present recommendations to the Education Policy and Direction Standing Committee in June. So this is just really to set the ball rolling, so to speak, and get some, well, really focus ourselves on establishing policy and regulation in our school district. And I want to really just sort of shout out to Surrey School District. There's lots of school districts that have policies and regulations, but certainly in the course of my own review of some of them, Surrey's really stood out. And obviously the committee will look at, you know, other policies to help guide the work. But my hope is that we sort of address the fact that we don't, as a board, we haven't set direction in the way that we should, arguably, and certainly that is in the way that the School Act requires us to, in terms of enrollment. So hoping that my colleagues see the wisdom in setting the policy committee to work on this.
Questions or comments? Superintendent.
Great, thank you, through the chair. Just want to clarify so I understand and I recognize I'm part of the policy subcommittee, so we can probably have this discussion there as well. But with the recommended motion to present the recommendations to Ed Policy, based on bylaw 9210, we would be taking recommended draft policy proposal to input for consultation and then bringing it to June, because I'm only worried about timing and order of operations. So it's just and workload currently between all of us now and June. So maybe just seeking clarity.
Trustee Duncan, are you able to clarify?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's an excellent question. From a process perspective, my intention was that we would bring it to Education Policy and Directions as the first really attempt to consult. So it's one of the ways that as a committee, we can consult with our stakeholders who are around that table. And then, you know, either as a policy subcommittee, we could make further recommendations around what other consultation would be prudent. Or possibly the standing committee might give directions as well around how they want to see us consult further on the draft recommendations. So I see it really as just the first stage of consultation once we come up with some recommendations.
Hey, thank you for that. I'm looking for a show of hands. I'm seeing none. Therefore, all those in favor of this motion? And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. On to your next motion, Trustee Duncan.
Yeah, just hoping this one will be a quick one. Just it's really just to circle back to what we agreed during the budget process, which is that we'll bring to the board meeting advocacy related motions when it comes to budget. So this one is that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, direct the board chair to write to the Minister of Education and Childcare, Minister of Finance, and Premier advocating for additional funding. So purposefully very open so that it leaves some room for us to be very detailed in our advocacy.
Excellent. Questions, comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that is unanimous again. We have no notices of motion for tonight and no general announcements. So I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Trustee Duncan. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you very much for your contributions.